Hello and welcome to all the quilters to the first Quilters Question Time live session of 2025, the beginning of a brand new year of creativity and stitching and questions. You have certainly gone to town in sending us questions this month. We've got 29 questions, so I'm going to have to promise to do my best to get through them all with an equal amount of time and not rush through the last few. Now, lots of you were already chatting away 10 minutes before starting time. David said, oh my goodness, there are 30 people already. So that bodes really well for the start of another year of stitch. So let me pass you over to David so he can say hi to you all and welcome you from wherever you are.
Hello everybody, Happy New Year again from me. So we've got lots of people online. My system is telling me we've got 83 people watching right now. It was about 96 a minute ago, so I'm not quite sure what happened. Julie Jampotts, I think you've got a question tonight. You were first on the comments tonight. Hello from Julie in Weston-super-Mare. Elizabeth Radabot, I think you have a question as well. Ricky Bull, you've definitely got a question. Susan Jenkins, Anne Snellgrove, Joe German, lots of people from the UK, Sillamon Creef, Jane Savage, lots of people there. Hopefully you can hear us all okay. So I'm going to hand back to Philippa and we will get cracking with the next part of the Q&A.
So you will notice, those of you who are regulars, that we haven't mentioned Peter yet. He has gone to the gym. He may rush in later on, but I've just left him a little note in the kitchen saying, Peter, please can you soften a large onion in slices in the large black pan? So we'll see whether he does that or not. If he doesn't, he's going to be hungry for longer later on. So as you know, those of you who join us regularly, we have two small gifts to give to two lucky winners who just need to be paid up members. You don't have to do anything. And so this month, what have I got you? Well, the usual nice little array of Philippa Naylor Quiltworks postcards, and then one lucky winner is going to win two little packs of 45mm rotary cutting blades. Now these are the Barnyarns blades, which are apparently made in the same factory as the regular ones, the more expensive ones that you buy, so they're just as good. And I've got some regular ones and some titanium coated ones which are supposed to last longer. I don't actually use the titanium ones, so maybe you can tell us whether you think they actually last longer. And then for our second lucky winner, we have got a bobbin saver donut, or alternatively a lovely bracelet to match the dress that you are wearing. So I had better draw two numbers out of my bag, pass them over to David, and then if Peter is back in time, he will be able to read out who our lucky winners are. I'm having trouble separating them here. So much for getting through questions. I've got three. There's two. Thanks, David. So we will let two lucky people know later on this evening. So we better get cracking with all your amazing questions.
Okay, so the first question is from Maggie Smith from Gloucestershire. Hi Maggie. And Maggie says, I'm very lucky to be going to QuiltCon in February this year, it's in Arizona, so it's a bit of a journey from the UK. I have two questions for Philippa. Any tips on getting the most out of those 2 days? How does it compare to the NEC show? And one for QQT members. Are any other QQT members going? You can post in the comments, I guess, if you are. And then Maggie says, sorry, that was 3 questions. But Philippa, QuiltCon, how does Maggie get the most out of this?
Okay, so Maggie, do we just answer 2 questions then and ignore one of them? Is that how it works? Well, first of all, that is incredibly exciting. So first time to QuiltCon. I wonder whether it's the first time to any large quilt show in the United States. And despite all of the teaching that I've done in the States and all of the big shows that I have taught at, I have never taught at QuiltCon, so I can't give you any personal experience on that, but others might be able to. So what would I say to you? Well, I hope you're not going all the way to the States just for 2 days and turning around and coming back again. I want to know if you're going to be doing something else and what that something else is. And it may be too late for this because people get really kind of signed up early, but I would have a really good look through the programme and choose what you want to do and get your name down to do those things, pay for them as soon as possible. And I would say go for absolutely everything that you possibly can fit in the 2 days, because 2 days isn't very long. I would include 1 or 2 lectures in that, perhaps in the middle of the afternoon, so that if you're a bit footsore and weary, you can have a sit down. If you sit a little bit towards the back, nobody will notice if you nod off, and they won't be offended by that. And I wouldn't be afraid to ask for help, or, you know, if you are doing a class or something, you get chatting to people and they say, oh, we just got out for lunch, ask if you can tag along and go with them. What I think is really wonderful about the Americans is they're so welcoming and very, very keen to share things with you. So I would certainly ask for help and do as much as you possibly can. And yes, it's over to you, QQT members. Do you have any advice, and is anybody else going? And we need a report back, don't we, next month? Thank you, David.
I can never quite tell when Philippa's done, and I have to press microphones on and off and that sort of thing, otherwise we get echoes. So the next question is from Sue Marling, and Sue Marling says, a dear friend has passed away and I would like to make memory quilts for her husband and 2 sons with her vast collection of woolen jackets, coats, skirts and slacks. It's interesting, we've had a few people talking about memory quilts. It's funny how these things seem to go in waves. Do you have any tips and tricks for sewing with wool? I don't want to make applique quilts and have chosen very simple patterns for the quilts, such as the tumbler block. What thread type and needle size would you recommend? And should the wool be stabilised before cutting? And that's from Sue Marley.
So Sue, that is a lovely project and a really kind thing for you to do for your friend's family. And 3 quilts is quite a lot. So yeah, well done on that. First of all, I would have a chat with them and just see how you feel they might use the quilt. So if, for example, they would prefer a lap quilt rather than a bed quilt, that might be a really good idea to find that out first, because obviously that's going to be 3 smaller pieces of work than, you know, really big kind of king size quilt. So I would chat to them and find out a little bit more about their colour preferences and whether there are any other artistic themes that they like, just to give yourself a little bit of guidance of where you might like to go with the fabrics and the designs. Now, we don't have a photo of the fabrics, but I imagine that you'll be able to get some fairly large pieces. So, you know, a sleeve when it's unpicked from a jacket is quite a large piece. Obviously the back, the fronts, you might incorporate little bits like pockets and little details that are actually in, you know. So you could, for example, you could have a block that actually was this section with a couple of buttons on it, something like that. I think that I would tend to look to modern quilts and the scale of modern quilts, large pieces, quite dramatic, rather than doing sort of kind of more conventional, smaller patchwork squares. And I'm not sure that a tumbling block is a block that I would choose, because that has a Y seam, which in your woolen fabrics might just be a little bit bulky. Again, it depends on the weight of the wool. There might be some finer ones, there might be some thicker ones, I don't know. I might suggest also that you make your seam allowances a little bit larger than a conventional 1/4 inch seam, because it might be that the actually woolen fabric is a little bit more open weave, not so tightly woven, and having a little bit more seam allowance just will give you a bit more to kind of hold on to as you are sewing, more to press flat. When you have a very narrow seam on quite a thick fabric, it can tend to spring up, and I think I would be tempted very much to press the seams open, and I would use a pressing cloth with steam and maybe a wooden clapper. If you are a member of our garment making classes, you will have seen me work with wool. I don't particularly suggest that you stabilise them because you're just going to add more bulk to what is already quite thick fabric anyway. And I would do some little bits of sampling first in terms of your seams and your pressing, just to see how you get on. So I wouldn't rush into it. I think, you know, there's plenty of time for this. I would do some research in terms of asking the family, finding out a little bit more, what size and so on. And then I would do some research into designs, looking at modern quilts, bigger, blockier, chunkier things, and then a little bit of experimentation with your seams and your pressing before you actually go ahead. So we will wait and see what you come up with, Sue.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Mark Campbell from Washington DC. Hi Mark. Mark says, Philippa and David, the best of both of you. When chain piecing, do you backstitch at the beginning and end of each link in the chain? And then he goes on to say, I've learned a lot from watching you, and after watching the piping class, I made my first quilt with piping, and we've got a picture of that here, and that looks incredible.
Say something, David.
Well, I was just thinking for the right superlative there. I was thinking of the right superlative. It looks incredible. I didn't believe the difference using silk thread. The difference that the silk thread made in the seam flatness when piecing the quilt I'm working on now. And he says you can teach an old dog new tricks. So that's from Mark Campbell. What about chaining, Philippa?
Okay, so the first thing, I'm not going to fall over my words here, Mark. Your quilt looks absolutely superb. So it looks incredibly straight and flat, hanging beautifully. You've got gorgeous fabrics. Your quilting design really enhances it. The piping, of course, is the perfect finish there. But all your corners look absolutely spot on. So you should be extremely proud of that, and I am pleased that the silk thread is really making a difference for you. That is so nice to hear. Now then, yes, I do a little back stitch at the start and end of every unit that I am sewing. And if you go to my Instagram page, which is @NaylorPhilippa, the most recent post is a little video for Bernina Sewing Machines explaining exactly that. And so I will chat about that for about 90 seconds or something, and you will absolutely get the full gen on that. So thank you for the question, and thank you for showing us your amazingly beautiful, precisely crafted quilt.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, we've got a question from Catherine Winter, and Catherine, unfortunately, you did send an image as Philippa asks you to, but it didn't come through on the email, and we didn't have a chance to reply to you to ask you to send it through. And it was without the picture, we couldn't really visualise what it was, the question you're asking. So we will come back to your question, Catherine. So the next question we do have is from Christine Tompkins in Somerset, and Christine says, hi, Happy New Year. I'm attempting to make your bird by bird quilt, and it's coming along slowly. I found myself wondering if you will be showing any or all of your quilts in the UK. I would love to have the opportunity to see them on show. So, Philippa.
Okay, I don't have anything planned in terms of a gallery at any of the big UK shows this year as yet, Christine, but if I do, and there are always things happening, you know, it's only right at the beginning of the year, if I do, then obviously we will advertise that and let everybody know. If you go to my kind of personal website, which has not had any attention really since we started Quilters Question Time nearly 6 years ago, however, it is philippanaylor.com. If you go to the gallery, there are images of the majority of my award-winning quilts, and if you go to the archive section, there's a little bit of information as to the size of those quilts and which awards they won. So that website gets completely forgotten about, but it is out there, and it does have quite good images, full images, and some details of quite a lot of my quilts. So in the meantime, that might keep you going.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Barbara Willett, I think. Is that how you pronounce your name, Barbara? She says, hello from a very cold Maine, -10 this morning. Well, I think we will give you that. That is very cold. As always, I enjoy the Q&A time. I learn so much. My question is about thread. I know that Philippa much prefers polyester over cotton thread because of the strength, less and less lint. Well done, Barbara. Some cotton threads are coated with silk. What is the advantage or disadvantage of this type of thread over polyester? Thank you.
So it is a huge subject, isn't it, sewing thread? And if you don't get taught anything about it, it's overwhelming and you don't know where to begin. You know, you just go to the shop, don't you, and you choose a thread according to the colour that it matches the fabric that you are sewing with. But there is so much more to consider. Now, I have to say that cotton thread coated with silk is not common and not anything that I've particularly come across, Barbara. But what you do get is cotton with a polyester outer to it, and the reason for choosing that, I am kind of always a little bit unsure on this, really. I mean, I am quite prescriptive about kind of thread, really, and say that I don't like cotton, but I do think that at the end of the day it's about getting the results you want and finding a thread that works for you, it works well in your sewing machine, and it gives you the kind of longevity that you need in the life of whatever it is that you are sewing. But a cotton core covered with polyester, and often that is spun polyester. Spun polyester is a filament polyester that is cut into strips and then spun around a cotton core. It's supposed to give you the best of both worlds, so that you will have kind of the stretch that you need. The fact that it's a spun polyester rather than a filament polyester means it's a little bit grippy, so it'll perform well in your sewing machine. In terms of kind of withstanding a hot iron, well, you have got the polyester on the outside, so not sure about that. But what I would say to you is that our fibres, fabrics and filament class, which is a standalone class, is not part of one of the series, is really useful on so that you can find out so much more about the different fibres and the properties themselves, and that is applicable to threads and fabrics. But there is a whole section in that class, and I think it's about an hour and 10 minutes just on all the different types, well, not all the different because there are so many, but the majority of the most used, yes, thank you, sewing threads, particularly with emphasis on machine threads rather than hand sewing threads. So I do think that that would be very well worth your while getting that class and looking at that, because it will give you much more detail than I can give you in the short time that we have available in this evening's session. So it's fibres, fabrics and filaments, and it is available on the store page of QQT.
Okay, thank you. Right, the next question is from Elizabeth, and I've forgotten to write down your last name, Elizabeth, but I think it's the Elizabeth that is watching now. Elizabeth says, Happy New Year. I'm working on a king-size quilt top that is comprised of 2-inch squares. The pattern calls for the squares to be sewn together in horizontal rows before sewing the rows together to form the various sections of the quilt, and we've got a picture of what the quilt pattern looks like. Does the grain of the fabric have any impact on a top like this? I'm using a mix of fabrics that are mostly Northcott. The straight grain is firm, the cross grain has some give but is not overly stretchy. Since I'm using squares, I can line the squares in each row so that the grain of each goes in the same direction, or should I just sew them as I pick them up and pay no attention to the grain? What do we think, Philippa?
Right, okay, so looking at this lovely design, I'm going to say there are perhaps two possibilities. Either that you're making it as a wedding gift or anniversary gift, or you're trying to get it done for Valentine's Day, in which case you need to get your finger out, don't you, Elizabeth? Or maybe it's next year, Valentine's Day next year. Now then, what do I think? Well, I just pulled a little scrap of fabric out of the drawer, and the straight grain running parallel to the selvage is this one, and when I stretch the fabric parallel to the selvage there is very little stretch in it, but if I stretch the other straight grain there is quite a lot of stretch in it. So that is what Elizabeth means when she said that she's got a bit more stretch on the crosswise straight grain. Now then, the pieces are small. So 2-inch squares, well, it doesn't really matter. They might be 2-inch finished or they might be 1.5 inch finished. We don't know, but they're quite small sections, aren't they? So there isn't really very much opportunity for them to get overstretched and distorted because they are quite small. But I think I would tend not to worry too much about it and just see how you go. I mean, I do think if you've got dual feed, the built-in dual feed on your sewing machine, it might be a good idea to engage that. You might want to increase the pressure on your presser foot so that the work is held nice and securely as it goes through, because it's not very thick, unlike a woolen fabric, which you might reduce the pressure on the presser foot to allow the thickness of those 2 plies to go through. Think about having your stitch length just average, I would say, actually, and reinforcing that little back stitch that we spoke about earlier at each end. And I would just set off really. But what I think I would do is, if I was finding that the slightly stretchier grain was distorting, I'd be tempted to put a parallel to this selvage. I'm going to have to get this right. Parallel to the selvage grain. I'm going to say it the other way around. This is what I would do. I would have the grain, the most stretchy grain down, and I would have a stretchy grain down, and I would pair that with the stronger grain, and I would have the stronger grain on the top, and I would sew it that way, because if you had the stretchier grain line on the top, it'll tend to get pushed more by the action of the foot as the work is going through the sewing machine. So if it is a problem, I would mix it, one stronger grain with the less strong grain with the stronger grain on the top. Did that make sense, David? Okay. But what I would also say to you is, I mean, if I was making this, what I personally would do, I'd be cutting out pretty much all of the squares and getting them pinned up in their order on my working wall behind me. I don't know what the size of the quilt is, piece of cardboard or something. It doesn't have to be a wall. And I don't think that you're forced to do them in horizontal kind of rows, because that's going to get awfully boring, sewing all of those intersections together. You can sew blocks, you can make units of kind of more blocky square size, and then just assemble, the top left kind of corner, and then the next bit and the next bit. I think that might be just more interesting in terms of the sewing rather than doing it in rows. And what I would also suggest that you do is have a little play of pressing your seams to one side or pressing your seams open, and see which you prefer. So that's a lot of information for what was a fairly simple question, but hopefully that helps. And we do want to know what that quilt is for, who it's for, and when it's got to be done by.
Well, I can tell you Elizabeth has posted on the comments, and it is for a wedding gift for August, so she has plenty of time to do that. And I've got another couple of comments came in. Maggie Smith, who's going to QuiltCon, she says that she has plans to go and see the Grand Canyon and Antelope Canyon, which I don't know, plus a Navajo village. Sarah Runicles tells us that she used to live in Arizona. Of course you did, Sarah. Well, why am I not surprised? She says make sure you get to the US Egg for breakfast brunch when you're in Arizona to keep your strength up for the show. So that's good information as well. Okay, the next question is from Madeline Aaron, I think that is. And Madeline says, I fell in love with this pattern. We've got a picture of the pattern here. I fell in love with this pattern, but found out in mid-piecing that cutting directions were very vague in terms of the angles to lay the outer templates for making the blocks, or for making the blocks wonky. I would consider making it again if there was some guidance that would lead to the colour strips meeting better. It seems the more the templates were angled, the worse the intersection. How would I determine a formula? Well, Madeleine, we'll see whether Philippa has an answer for you on that one.
Well, I always have an answer.
Yeah, you do.
I always have an answer, but it might not be the answer that you want. But even me. I mean, I am immensely flattered that you think that I can answer all of these questions, and sometimes without a photograph to help me. So yeah, I am tremendously flattered, and I can see, Madeline, why you fell in love with this quilt. The colours are absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful, quirky arrangement, and yeah, it's a really fun piece. I don't know the pattern. I don't know who it's by, and have not seen the instructions. And I have studied your photograph carefully, but it's really hard for me to see where the construction lines are. The only construction lines that I can really see, apart from the obvious ones, are that in the heart there is a seam that joins a rectangle to a squarish section to create the heart. So without that information, it's really, yeah, I can't work out what you need to do, because you just don't have enough knowledge of the actual quilt and the method that has been suggested and what the pieces are like. So I'm sorry not to be able to help you further, but that's all I can say at this point. Back to you, David.
Okay, so we've come to the extent of Philippa's knowledge. It's quite vast, but it does have limits at the edges. So we've discovered where some of that is. Okay, the next question is from Mindy Easley. And Mindy says, hello from El Paso. I purchased a book called Farm and Folk Quilt Alchemy by Sarah Larson, and I'm going to struggle with this, Buscaglia, I think that is. She dyes her hemp, linens and cotton fabrics with dyes she makes from onion skins, madder roots and many plants she finds where she lives, as she doesn't like store dyes. What are your thoughts on this, Philippa? You've mentioned that you dye your own fabric, she says. I know you have done in the past, and are very conscientious of the environment, as we all should be. The store dyes are more environmentally better now, if I remember correctly. Also, would you consider, this is a second question, would you consider a knitting tutorial on steps for a cardigan or something more challenging than a scarf? As that's what you'd get from me if you wanted something knit. And that's from Mindy Easley.
Okay, so Mindy, thank you for your question. You took me right back to when I was at school and I was studying textiles. I'd be about 15 or 16, and we must have been talking about natural dyes. And I can remember for about 6 months I made my mum collect onion skins and have them in a bag under the kitchen sink, with the intention that I was going to dye wool with them. And I can remember at school there were some carding combs that were made from teasels, and the teacher let me borrow them, and I was going to dye this wool and the card it and spin it. Well, of course I did it, and eventually my mum got fed up of the onion skins and they went in the dustbin. But anyway, yeah, in an ideal world, in some senses, natural dyes would be more eco-friendly, certainly, wouldn't they? And my experience of dyeing is using cold water Procyon MX dyes, which obviously are kind of powdered chemical dyes. I think that for most of us, unless you really love the long dyeing process of using natural dyes, going out and finding this stuff, being in an area where you actually can find, you know, the lichen or the bark and all the other different roots and things that you would need, I think that in today's world, it isn't really realistic for most of us to be able to do that. And often the range of colours is more muted. So it does depend on, you know, what kind of colours you prefer to use. The dyeing that I have done in the past, I have done in my own kitchen, obviously fairly carefully, and have enjoyed it very much and got really good results doing it. But I dye incredibly limited quantities, you know. I mean, I haven't done any dyeing for a long time, and I would only dye for a particular quilt that I was making, and that quilt might take me about a year to make. So
dye those ones yourself?
The ones behind are fabrics that I dyed. So yes, thank you. Well thought there, David. So I think you have to do what works for you and be guided kind of by your own conscience, really. And I would think that there are lots of kind of dyeing forums online, I mean dyeing fabric forums online, that you can tap into and ask other people what they do. So I wouldn't beat yourself up about it in any way, but I wouldn't be doing it on any kind of a commercial scale for sure. So that is my question to that. And then knitting, you know that my sister is a knitwear designer and she lives in Barcelona. We could have the Naylors knitting knitted, yeah, we could, couldn't we? It's funny that, because I've just for my son's girlfriend Agnes, I said for Christmas that she should choose a pattern and that I would knit her a cardigan, and we're still looking for a nice pattern. And I knitted my son a Gansey, which is a fisherman's jumper, which I've been knitting for about 3 years, and I gave it to him at Christmas. And he's an oil painter. He goes out oil painting on the street, painting street scenes. And I said, "This is your painting jumper." And it took me ages, didn't it? He said, "Oh no, it's too good for a painting jumper." I said, "No, it's to keep you warm. You must wear it." Anyway, he was wearing it, and he does dancing, and his dancing teacher is, I think, Italian, and he was wearing his painting jumper, and it's got these cables that are left and right on either side, but then it's got a kind of left and right cable that goes down the middle, and the cable goes down into the cuffs and so on. And he said his dancing teacher is a really keen knitter, and she was studying it really closely, and it's knitted on the round. She was looking for the seams, there weren't any. She noticed that the cables were left and right and down the centre. He said she was really impressed with it. So yeah, I mean, I would love to pass all of that on, but you know, it is a question of time, and you know, yeah, maybe. Let me think about it.
Okay, so I was just looking to see if I can find the name of the next person. The next question is, I haven't written your name down, I'm afraid, and I was just looking back through the list of questions to see if I could pull it out, and I didn't manage to do it in time. But it's another memory quilt question, and whoever this lady I think is, she says, "My daughter-in-law has asked if I can make a quilt incorporating." So she's already made one memory quilt based on her granddaughter's t-shirts, and she would like to incorporate another granddaughter's dance memorabilia, which includes things like tutus, lace, satin, all kinds of materials used in dance costumes. And she thinks it sounds fabulous, however she has no idea where to start. So Philippa, do the bounds of your knowledge and skills extend to putting tutus into quilts, into memory quilts?
Absolutely.
What can you tell us?
Okay, so are these two granddaughters sisters, or are they from different families? Because that is my first question. If they are sisters, then presumably one girl has seen the quilt that has been made for her sister. Does she like it? Does she want something similar? So that is the first thing. We haven't seen the first quilt, or we don't have a picture of it in this particular session. So it's a little hard to kind of see whether you could do a similar style of work to the first quilt. What age is your granddaughter? So, you know, is she a little tot? Is she 5, 6, 7, 8, or is she 16? You know, because that will affect how kind of girly in that sense you make it. How much of the various materials do you have? So is it small pieces? Have you got a lot of it? Are you going to need to add to it? You know, is a lot of it stretch? So lycra type fabrics, that kind of thing. So I think there are lots of questions that will really need to be explored before you actually start to go ahead with a design. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to answer some of those questions and then get back to us with some of those answers next month, so that I can have a little think about it. Because if you've got a lot of lycra type fabrics with stretch, you are going to need to stabilize them. I imagine I would stabilize them on a stretch Vilene type Pellon product, something like that. I would tend to be doing overlay. So again, if we could see, I can smell those onions being cooked actually. No sooner said than done. Can you smell them? How funny. This really made me laugh. Okay, but I think that you could perhaps do quite a little bit, like, you know, you could, little bits of lace could become sashing between blocks. You could overlay lace, you could overlay net, all kinds of things. So can I have a bit more information, and can we have a photo of the first quilt that we made, and then we can explore it more with you, and it can make it really superb and not too difficult to sew.
Okay, so I found the lady's name. It was Krista Martin. So
thank you,
Krista, and she says she's actually going to be travelling live, so she's not watching now, but she will watch the replay. And hopefully, Krista, when you watch the replay, you'll be able to get back to us, and we can give you some more. Well, I won't be giving you many ideas, but Philippa will be giving you lots of ideas. Okay, the next question is from Judy Tinker, and Judy says, "I'm very curious as to how your sewing studio looks. How do you store your fabrics? How do you organise your room? And that's from Judy Tinker in New York State.
Judy, you are a little tinker. You are not going to see what my room looks like. It's an absolute mess. I have actually, in the last week, sorted out loads of stuff and chucked loads of things away, and there's still a lot to do. It used to, before Quilters Question Time and our garment making classes, used to be quite kind of clear and tidy, but no longer. There is a massive rack of garments that we've made there. I did put a load of stuff into the loft. There used to be 2 towers of boxes of all the various Quilting Question Time classes. Each had their own box. But the actual fabric is stored in wheelie plastic pull-out drawers underneath the table, or in those big plasticky laundry bags with a zip that you get. The garment making fabric is in the big laundry bags, and the quilt making fabric is in the pull-out drawers. But basically, until it is super tidy, this is as much as you're going to see, so sorry about that. Moving swiftly on. Oh, I just have a question to ask. Okay, so I just happened to be chatting with Sarah Runnicles, who lived in Arizona for some time, and she took delivery, or she went to collect her new Benina 735 sewing machine. I think it was Thursday last week. She even took a day off work. So we want to know whether you've had the chance to get it out of the box, Sarah, and what do you think of it so far? Right, thank you, David.
Okay, so Catherine Winter, who we didn't get the photo, she's obviously watching. She said, sorry, the photo didn't come through. So which was Catherine's question? It was back, wasn't it? It was about the wool patchwork quilt.
Yeah.
We'll come back and have a look at that. But she says it was it's 6 by 8 square, 6 by 8, 6 8-inch squares that were pieced, but not with a seam. It says 6 by 8-inch squares, so I don't think they're squares, are they?
No, it must be 6.
We'll come back and
Yeah.
have a look at that, Catherine. Okay, the next question on here is from Julie Otley, aka Jampots. I think, Julie, you go by Jampots on your YouTube name, don't you? It always confuses me when I know people by one name and their YouTube name is something slightly different. So we've got a picture for you, which I think I've queued up. There we go. And Julie says, I've completed the top of the creative curved piecing project piece, and I can recognise that one, the picture on the left, that definitely looks like the creative curved piecing, and looks like you've done a really good job. Julie says, I'm very pleased with the result and how flat it seems to lie. I do have little bumps at some of the intersections though, despite trimming off excess seam allowance and pressing using a clapper. Can you suggest anything else to try, or will it not be visible in the finished piece? And the right hand side, Julie's given us an image of her seams, which brings me to my next question. Do you have any suggestions for how to quilt it? I intend to make it into a wall hanging. How would you suggest I make a hanging sleeve, as the top edge is not straight? Well, that's a good question, Julie, that we know an answer to. Finally, I only cut the fabric with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so binding it will be tricky. You only suggest increasing the outside seam allowance in the final video, and my pieces were pieced together by the time I watched it. Okay. Will I still be able to bind it without losing my points? I intend to bind it using the fabric of the centre square to pull all the colours back together. It was a lovely challenging project which forced me to sew slowly, taking frequent breaks. Thank you. Well, the creative curve piecing project is judging by the number of people that send in pictures of them, it's the Happy Hearts is probably the most popular project, and the creative curve piecing comes very close to that as well. So sent the pictures. That's from Julie. Philippa, what can you make? There were several questions and answers in there. What can you make from that for us?
Well, Miss Jampots, I can hardly keep my head around all of the questions that you've answered there.
We've only got another half an hour.
Yeah. I might need a little bit of help on that. And the smell of those onions cooking is just putting me off completely. Okay, well, first thing to say, it looks amazing. It's really beautiful. Your fabrics are absolutely gorgeous. The placement of your fabrics, the fussy cutting, all of it. You've done such a nice job with it. You should be really, really proud of it. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. Now, Now then, in terms of, you've got a little bit of bulk there. If you go back to the class and you look at the amount of clipping that I do, you will see that the amount of clipping that I've got by comparison to the amount of clipping that you've got, I do an awful lot more. So if we could just go back to the photos, please, David. He's already moved on. So but if we look at the photo, so if we look at the photo of the wrong side of the quilt, and if we look towards the bottom, you've got that horizontal seam where you've got the turquoise and the pink. So the turquoise, the blues are below, the pink is above. If we look at the turquoise, can you see you've got two clips about 1/2 inch apart, just to the right hand side, and then there's very little for quite a way, and then there's quite a big clip, and then nothing more. If you clip, take those little V's out at least every 3/8, and I do every 1/4 inch, you will get a much smoother finish. What you get if you don't do that, where you've got a clip and then no clips, you get a little point and then a straight bit and another little point. So you need to add more clips and need to take the toe of the iron in and really get between the either side of the seam. So do have another look at the images and that part of the actual class, because that's going to make a big difference. Now then, how to quilt it. The world is your oyster. I mean, you could just do some very simple wavy lines with it. You could just do some kind of echo quilting. A little bit depends how much you want to kind of disrupt the actual the design. I think I'd be tempted to keep it quite clean and just maybe do quilting in the individual colours within each of the shapes. So pink where you've got pink, blue where you've got blue, and so on. Because if you start to do something in another colour that goes right across it, you are going to disrupt the beautiful flow of your design. So, I mean, you could do wavy lines across, so you've got that central bit, you could do wavy lines and then come like this, and then you could maybe do a circle or something in the middle. If you've got quilt as desired in your library, it would be worth having a look at that, because that might give you some further suggestions. Now then, how to make a hanging sleeve as the top edge is not straight. All of that information is in Further Fabulous Finishes. It shows you how to do that. It's quite easy because you haven't really got a great deal of up and down on the top, and it's not a big piece, so it is going to be quite easy to sort that out. It's not going to flop forward above the hanging sleeve. So Further Fabulous Finishes for that. Now then, I only cut the fabric with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so binding will be tricky. No, it won't. Okay, so the piping and binding version 2 explains to you how to cut the backing fabric and the wadding the backing bigger, and you will get your extra 1/4 inch in the backing and the wadding, and you'll still get the front all enclosed. This is what I think you are going to do. I might be wrong on this, but I think a very narrow piping in your lime green colour and then pink binding, because I think a 1/2 inch wide pink 1/2 inch wide lime binding will be too strong. You've got quite a small amount of that lime colour there, and just a little touch of it in a piping followed by the binding in the pink. And I would probably go with the solid pink, but cut a little strip, interview it, would really enhance this beautiful piece of work. And you can do all of that. Look at version 2 of piping and binding to show you how to deal with the edge. In both of those cases, your piping and your binding needs to be cut on the bias to give it the stretch to get around the curve. And have I answered everything? I hope so. So it's all in your classes. You just need to do a little bit of digging to find it. And again, we look forward to seeing the finished result. And don't immediately dismiss that little bit of piping. Just have a little think about it, because you might be right.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. That sounds really good with the lime green piping and then the pink. That sounds interesting. So if you do manage to do that, Julie, you've got to send us a picture so that we can see it. Okay, the next question is from Linda. I haven't got your last name, I'm afraid, Linda. And Linda says, do you sometimes use invisible thread or monofilament threads in your quilt? If so, what brand do you recommend, as they come in different weights and thicknesses? I'm trying to make an art quilt for the first time, and I think they use this type of thread sometimes. Do you have any tips for using this type of thread in sewing machines? I have a Janome, and that's from Linda.
So I could be really glib here, Linda, and I could say, do you have any tips for using this type of thread in sewing machines? And my answer would be don't. However, that is not what you want to hear. Now, I years ago, I used monofilament thread, and it is the clear for light fabrics, and it is smoke, which is a grey obviously, for dark coloured fabrics. It isn't fun to use. However, I do understand and have been told by many people that the superior threads, invisible or monofilament thread, is of an easy to sew quality, and I would have that in the top of the sewing machine and bottom line in the bobbin. However, do not get caught up on the idea that there are musts in any of this or rules. This is an art quilt. An art quilt can do absolutely anything you like, and I always think that a beautiful coloured thread enhances the design, and you don't really want the thing to disappear. So it might be that a lovely 40 weight shiny polyester thread in a beautiful colour is a nicer option. Okay, so yes, superior threads, yes, just in the top and bottom line in the bobbin. You would loosen your top tension slightly to enable this to glide through the sewing machine, because it's not a grippy thread, it's a really slidey thread. Don't have your stitch length too short, keep it relatively long so that it's just easier to sew. And I would have a good old practice with it first on a scrap of a quilt sandwich before you go ahead. Regarding the brand of sewing machine, shouldn't really make any difference, so I'm going to throw that out there. If other people who do use it have got any advice, please do pass that on to Linda. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to say to Philippa that we have taken, we're 3/4 of the way in, and we're nearly halfway through our questions. There were a lot of questions in this month. There were over 30 questions. So we will get through as many as we can. We may not get to all of them this month, but we will do our best. So we're pretty much doing them in, first out. So if you sent your questions in early, they're getting dealt with earlier. Okay, the next question is from Christine Leonard, and Christine says, please can you help me with a fabric problem? What is the best way to cut a perfect square which is on the straight grain if there is no selvage to act as a guide? I can find the straight grain by pulling the fabric, but this isn't accurate enough for me to cut it. I've tried lining one edge of the fabric up along a horizontal line on my cutting mat, which often shows the other 3 lines are out. If I choose another edge to line up, I still have 3 edges out. How do I choose which one to use? And that's from Christine Leonard.
Okay, so really, Christine, this is what I think you are saying, is that your fabric is slightly off grain. So when it gets woven, the warp threads are the ones that run parallel to the selvage. They are put on the loom first. They often are slightly stronger threads because they have got to withstand the weaving that goes across the weft threads that go across from side to side. Okay, now when the fabric is made, it may distort on the loom because they may not have got the tensioning right, who knows, and it may also get slightly distorted in the finishing processes. And you buy a piece of fabric and you fold it in half, and when you fold it in half, it doesn't run true on the unfolded edge. It is kind of offset. So there is a distortion happening in the manufacture of that fabric. It's not steel, is it? It's not metal. It's pliable. It's movable, and so you are pretty much always going to be working with fabrics that are not on the true straight grain. So I would stop worrying about it. I would find one good grain and I would just cut your squares. If you've got any fabric that you've bought that is really off grain, I would tend not to use it, but it is the nature of the beast. That is what you're going to get. So the higher quality the fabric, the tighter the weave, cotton poplin, art gallery fabrics, Liberty lawn, that kind of thing, they are often much better quality and less off grain, but price often isn't an indication of quality. So look at the fabrics that you've got, see which ones are the best, make a note mentally of of the actual brand that works best for you and try and stick with those. But you're fighting an imperfect beast, really. I mean, aren't we all? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Philippa. Hopefully that's helpful. So the next question is from Maria Burton, who tells me that she's known as Maria. Rita is her Sunday name. So since it's Tuesday, we'll call you Maria, which is what you want to know. So there's a picture that goes with this one as well. There's the picture. She says, I've put together the small quilts and just wanted an opinion about the pattern of quilting. And we can see on the right-hand side, she's drawn a diamond-shaped pattern. Do you think it will detract from the triangular shapes on the quilt? The pattern from which I made this quilt shows it with small box-like quilting. Any thoughts?
Just keep a picture there, David, a minute.
Yeah, okay.
So I think it's really interesting that your quilt colours match the map on the wall behind it exactly. I wonder if you made it in that room and whether you were subconsciously guided by that map of the world. Anyway, we can see on the right hand side that you have drawn the lines that you are going to quilt. I think that would be really great. I mean, what you've got is quite a lot of the cream background. Sorry, we can come back to me now. Thank you, David. Quite a lot of cream background fabric there, which does need breaking up. So I think that you could choose the blue, for example, and stitch all your lines in the blue, and then you're going to layer the thing with another level of patterning that will still allow the piecing to show through, but you will get an additional kind of element going on there. And it's not a thing that I use at all, really, but you could go with something like a King Tut, which is a 40/3 cotton. You want the line to show up. I mean, what might be great, and you could try it out on a sample, but it would take a heck of a long time to do, would be a nice long triple stitch in a lovely blue colour there. But so you want the line to show up, so something like a thicker King Tut type thread might work very well for this. So yes, go for it and show us the finished result. Oh yes, and it is a little narrow blue piping and then the brown binding. and take your lines across into the borders. Don't stop at that narrow border you've got. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Ricky Bull, and Ricky, I know you're watching as well. And Ricky says, I have looked at applique and reverse applique for a project I'm trying to do. It's to quilt the central medallion on a double quilt that is the same as one of my Chinese rugs, the motif from the Chinese rugs. I've come to the conclusion that this part would be best done in reverse applique, but, and then Ricky has attached 2 photos of how far they've got so far, and I will put those up. I haven't got Ricky's teed up, so let me tee that up. There we go. I'm thinking of a combination of turned edge, possibly shells and other bits for the dragon, but I'll experiment with it once I sort this out. Also, would you put interfacing behind the blue to give more body behind the edges? I hope this is clear enough, and we'll fully understand if you don't have time for this. Thank you, Ricky. So Philippa, any thoughts on that?
So I think it's quite a challenging project, Ricky. Now we can see from the drawn diagram that you put a ruler there, and the size of that lower edge of the applique that you are planning to do is about 26 inches, something like that. So it's not so small, but a lot of detail there. And there is a dragon and clouds and various other elements that are going to be included in that. Would I do it by reverse applique? I probably would do regular applique, but what I think that I would do is I would do a mix of different things. I mean, we don't know whether this is going to be a bed quilt, that is going to be a wall hanging. I can't actually tell in the picture whether the blue fabric that you're using is a cotton fabric or a sateen, or whether it is some kind of silky fabric. I can't actually tell. A sateen fabric is not great for this type of detailed work because it has more floats going over the top than a regular weave, and it will fray more. I think that I would be tempted to do regular applique, but in the very detailed areas I would probably be doing a very fine satin stitch or something like that with a lovely glossy thread, and I probably would be creating a lot of the design with stitch rather than actual piecing. I mean, I would also, it depends on what you like to do, but I would also encourage you to think about kind of painting subtle colours on it and things like that. So I think there are actually multiple techniques that are going to happen in this, and I think you should do a little bit of sampling. It is quite complex. So what I'm saying is I would do regular applique on some bits, but I would do some bits would be turned edge, but some of the really tricky shapes I would do with satin stitch with a lovely thread. I would consider using painting or inks or ink tint pencils or something like that in some areas, and you've got some sort of scallop areas on the lower edge, and I would wonder about you creating the lines on that with a triple stitch and different coloured threads. So I think there are multiple things to think about there, so it is quite the project.
Okay, Rookie, hopefully that has given you some inspiration as to what you might want to do with that and how you might want to proceed. Okay, the next question is from Deborah Weller, and Deborah says, when I am free motion quilting with the Bernina stitch regulator, the BSR, set on mode 2, which is when the needle continuously goes up and down, and I'm moving into and then out of a corner such as the top of a heart, the stitches on the back using 100 weight thread in the bobbin look thicker or unpleasant like a blob of thread. And we've got a picture for this, so we can see she's taken some close-ups for us. Thank you for that, Deborah. I think I figured out to keep my pace constant and don't pause in that spot for too long as I'm backing out. Is there anything else that would prevent that blobbing of this stitching?
Thank you. So now then, I am not a big fan of this stitch regulator, and Bernina do know this. So I'm quite kind of feel comfortable about saying it. I personally find it slow and jerky, and a thing that I do say to my students is try it with and try it without and see which you get on best with, and I would do that at intervals. Okay, you know, just as a beginner you might decide your stitch regulator is the best way to go, but then, you know, 3-6 months down the line, have another go without it. Keep trying with and without, because I actually do think that you are better without it because you will not be as jerky or as slow. However, I don't think that the problem that you have is very much to do with the stitch regulator. It is your tension. Okay, so we are looking at the right side of the quilt, and if we can just go back to the images, please, David. So if we look particularly on the left hand side, so you've got a nice shiny glossy thread on the top there, and then you've got a darker thread in the bobbin, and the bobbin thread is come up, and you say that is 100 weight thread. Is that correct? Have I just yeah, 100 weight thread in the bobbin. Now, the finer the thread in the bobbin, the more easily it is going to go through the bobbin tension spring. Okay, and so you need to tighten the bottom tension. Okay, and we have got information on this in the Garment Makers Philippa's Foundations. It's easy to find there. Okay, so if you go to our Garment Makers website, and on the home page there are lots of free videos called Philippa's Foundation. There's one about tension. So you need to tighten your bottom tension so that it's not coming up to the top, and then you will find that that is much reduced. It is more apparent at those changes of direction, because you are kind of pulling the top thread more as you move from one direction of sewing to another direction of sewing, so that bottom thread is coming up and is more apparent at that point, but you can see it at all of the stitches. A thing that I personally always do, regardless of the background colour, the colour of the back of the quilt, I always have the same colour in the bobbin as I have in the top. So if we were to flip up the quilt that is behind me, wherever I've sewn in red on the top, it's red in the bobbin, wherever I've sewn in green, it's green, and so on. And so if your tension isn't quite spot on, it's less noticeable. However, that is not going to fix this. You do need to adjust your top tension, and you can loosen your sorry, you need to adjust your bottom tension by tightening it. You can slightly loosen your top tension, but that won't fix it. It's because the thread is so fine, it's getting pulled up and sliding through the tension spring on the bobbin casing much more easily than it should. I'm trying to be fast and I'm not managing it, am I?
There we go. Okay, so a couple of comments have come in. Ricky Bull says that they're using art gallery fabric. It's a bed quilt, and they're also trying a bit of molar. So that was for the previous question with the motif from the applique.
Good fabric choice.
So Philippa approves the fabric choice. Maria Burton, who was the previous one with the triangles, says, thank you Philippa, I feel much braver now about trying a different stitch colour in her diamond, so she's very happy. And Ali P tells us that she's storing red onion skins and avocado stones. Well, of course you are, Ali. We would have assumed quite naturally that you've got a big bucket full of them somewhere. So well
and
done,
lichen, have you been scraping lichen off walls, Ali? Or lichen?
So we're not going to be surprised at whatever Ali tells us, I don't think. Okay, so the next question is from Karen Disk, I think, or Diskay. And Karen says, I've been making blocks from flannel of a lovely snowman pattern by the Quilt Factory called Chilling with My Snowmies. And there's a picture with this. I think I haven't got it teed up yet. I will come back to the picture shortly. I need to add the details such as faces and swirls around the snowflakes, which I plan on doing with a number 8 Razzle poly thread. My hands cannot manage hand embroidery through multiple layers of flannel. And flannel applique pieces on top of flannel fabric, so that's going to be very thick. I'm open to suggestions for different options of adding the details on my sewing machine. So I'm going to put the photo up and see whether you've got any suggestions on that one, Philippa.
Okay, thank you. And yes, it does look really, really fun.
I'm not there yet.
Oh, sorry, a really fun pattern. Really lovely little blue snowman. Okay, so I don't quite know I don't know what the actual features look like on the pattern, whether they are just lines or whether they're actually bigger applique shapes. I'm not sure. Now, Razzle Dazzle is a fairly thick metallic thread. It's actually a heavyweight polyester thread with metallic kind of spun into it, and I did think I had some and I had a good dig through my metallic drawer, but I don't actually have any. It is when I did look on the website, and it does suggest that you use it in the bobbin or for couching, so that you're not actually putting it through the needle of the sewing machine. Now I've got 2 feet here, and this won't make any sense if you don't have a bonina, but if you do happen to have a bonina, there is a foot number 6 that has a little hole in it that you can put a fine thread through, and then I've got a foot 21 which has a larger hole, and the couching thread is fed through the hole, and then you can do a narrow zigzag over it, and it holds the decorative stitch down, and it would give you a very defined result. I think that would look fantastic around the stars and things that you were talking about. I'm not sure whether that is so easy for things like eye shapes, but it is doable. I mean, I'd make sure that you have strong contrast. You can see with the specks on the one snowman that those dark black specks really show up, so you want to have a really good dark colour in there. I am going to mention the triple stitch again, because I do think that is such a good defining stitch. There is also a 7 stitch that goes backwards and forwards 7 times on my sewing machine. If you were to just do an eye shape and couch it, what you will find is that you'll do your zigzag over your decorative thread. You'll be able to thread the decorative thread onto a tapestry type needle, but something with a bit more of a point, and just thread it under the layers to finish off the ends. So that is possible. So I would suggest that you just have a little think about that, and again do some trying out on some scraps and see how you get on. And again, we would like to know how you do.
Okay, thank you. Now, I don't think we're going to get through all the questions tonight, because we're over the hour now.
Come on, let's let's go for it, David.
I'm going to jump to question 26. 25. So this is from Anne Garrettson, and Anne says, she's got a tongue slightly in her cheek here. She says, I'm in such despair. My binding corners aren't right. And there's a picture that goes with this. My binding corners aren't right. Is this normal or is it just me? I've been cutting my strips 3 1/4 inch wide and sewing a 1/2 inch seam. I've checked my measurements carefully, but on every quilt I have trouble turning the corners back. The layers never fit inside the binding at the corners. They curl up, making it a real struggle to bring the binding around with a flat proper fold. What am I doing wrong? Many thanks, and that's from Anne Garrettson.
So, your question amused us, so thank you for that. And we realised that your level of despair about your binding is not kind of world-shattering, and there are much more difficult things happening in the world than binding that doesn't fit. However, you need to revisit the piping and binding class, particularly the bit that tells you what the formula is for cutting the width of the binding. It is 6 times the finished width of the binding plus about 1/2 inch. 6 times 1/2 inch is 3. That's the width of your binding plus 1/2 inch. So the binding should be at least 3 1/2 inches. And I also say in the class that I often cut a small piece about 8 inches long of the width that I think it's going to be. I sew it onto the actual quilt and I fold it over and I check it before I cut the full length. And sometimes I will cut it at 3 5/8 of an inch. This is without any piping, so your binding is too narrow, okay? And that is all it is, okay? So it is easy to fix. Yeah, just revisit the class and good luck with it and let us know how you get on. Right, and I'm just going to whiz through these, David. I'm going to be so question 20. Please would Philippa give us her opinion about buying the circular attachment for a machine? I don't have one, I don't use one, I'm really sorry, I can't give you any information on that, but the very fact that I don't have one for sewing circles probably means that I think that I don't need it, but I will invite others to give their opinion on that if they would be so kind. And then question 21, it is about a shaped table mat and how do you bind it? How do I sew the binding on the curved side? Piping and binding.
What question are you on?
23, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I've put the picture up for question 21.
Okay, sorry, I jumped. I missed a page in my rushing. Okay, so there's a few questions on binding. So sorry, 23 was how do you sew the... Did you want me to do 21? I'm not helping at all here, am I?
It was just to show that she'd managed to get her points based on the question that the answer that you gave, so that's fine.
Yeah, they're perfect. So sorry, Jane, your perfect points are absolutely spot on and you should be very proud, and your colours and everything looks gorgeous, so well done. Okay, so 23. Question, yeah, and I'm going to cover question 22. They're both about binding. So one is about binding on the curve. The binding needs to be cut on the bias. We explained that in piping and binding version 2, so have another look at that class. And also in that class for question 22, which is from Gloria Vega, how do you finish off when you are hand sewing? How do you finish off one length of thread when you run out of thread and you're going to start a new length of thread? That is also explained in that class, so please look there. And then there is a question about the peg bag and somebody having a Janome Atelier 6 and wondered if there was another stitch available because they say that machine doesn't have the triple stitch. I don't know that machine. If anybody out there has got a Janome Atelier 6 and knows if there is a triple stitch, please can you let Carol Brown know? Question 25 we've done, which is about the incorrect width of the binding. What size needle do you use when quilting? It depends on the thread that you are using, so I like to use a very fine thread and either a 60 or a 70 microsex needle. No, I don't use cotton thread. And what thread do you use for quilting? I tend to use a 40 weight shiny polyester in the top of the sewing machine and 60 weight bottom line in the bobbin. Over to you, David. Do you want to chuck any more questions in there?
I think probably that we most of the other ones are people showing us the stuff, so we can deal with those separately. I think probably we'll jump, unless any are jumping out at you. Peter now has the names of the winners of the draw for the thing. So let's do that. Let's announce that. If there's any other questions you want to cover, Philippa, then we can cover them.
I would just like you to show the picture on 31 when we finish. Okay. So hello, Peter.
Hello.
Thank you for cooking the onions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the bread.
He's cooked bread. He baked bread as well. Fortunately, he hasn't brought the bread up for us. Early on in the class.
It's still rising. Second rising.
Early on in the class, I said that I'd left you a note to cook onions, and then we were about halfway through the class, and the smell of the onions was wafting up, and we said, no sooner said than done. What a man there. So thank you for that.
I was intrigued by the cutting the square fabric actually, and the expression that we're all fighting the imperfect beast actually.
Yes,
I thought it was a reference to me. Yes.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Peter.
Yes, you say that now. Yes. Right. The two lucky winners are Jennifer Lawton and Diane Martin.
Marvellous. So David will get in touch with you two ladies, Jennifer and Diane, to ask for your postal address, and we will get your gifts parcelled up and sent off to you. And before we finish, it was such a beautiful quill, and I'm going to ask David just to very quickly read out what Anne says about her quill. I didn't want to finish without seeing the gorgeous work that she's done.
The quilts. And Anne, I've got to put my microphone on. Anne says, I just want to say a huge thank you to Philippa for sharing her wealth of knowledge and experience. Attached an image of the second quilt I made. The first was done many years ago and I was self-taught. For this one, I followed Philippa's beginner class and learnt so much: cutting straight lines, use of needles and threads, squaring up the quilt sandwich and the binding, just to name a few. The quilt was an initial challenge of my disappearing blocks, organised by my local quilters group. The colourways were therefore aubergine, jade and raspberry, to reflect the initials of Anne's name. This is Anne Rodriguez. I programmed my domestic sewing machine to complete the quilting. I named the quilt Perseverance, as it was hard work to master the basics as well as to complete it. I'm sure there's a lot I can still learn, and I look forward to signing up to more of Philippa's classes. And that's Anne Rodriguez, and it looks like a beautiful quilt.
It does, and that is the perfect image for us to finish this evening session on. So thank you for sending that in. I'm so pleased that you had so much success with it, and this is just the start of your journey. You will now go on to make lots more beautiful quilts, but it is really, really well made. It's gorgeous in every sense, use of fabric, the design, the whole thing. So well done, Anne, on that. So we will be back on Thursday night with our garment makers. So if you are a member of the garment makers group and want to join us, there is still time to send your questions in. And what you have learned tonight is the sooner you get your question in, the more likely it is to be answered. So from all of us here, we hope you stay cozy and warm, get lots of projects on the way, and we will look forward to hearing more from you and answering more questions at the end of February. So from Peter,
the imperfect beast,
the magic onion man, and from David,
Goodbye,
who pressed all the right buttons in all the right order this evening, and from myself, thank you so much for joining us.